Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? A government-regulated and centrally planned economy has never produced personal prosperity or enhanced human freedom at any time in history. So why do we have one in America? Tonight, the folly of the Federal Reserve. In this morning's Wall Street Journal, Congressman Ron Paul writes that for nearly 100 years, the Federal Reserve's vice-like grip on the supply and the cost of money have restrained the liberty and dampened the prosperity of all in the United States and even around the world, except for certain big banks. Indeed, the statistics are daunting. In the years before the Fed, the value of the dollar went up, meaning that comparable goods and services actually cost less with the passage of time. That's because we had a stable money supply and interest rates were subject to supply and demand. This is a phenomenon unknown to Americans today, unless, God bless you, you've been around for more than 100 years. The rest of us have all grown up expecting prices to go up with the passage of time. But history has taught us that in a market free from central planning, as our forebears enjoyed, prices go down. In the first 130 years of our existence as a country, with a few brief exceptions, we didn't have a central bank that regulated all the other banks. We had currency that was backed by gold, so it had real value and it couldn't be created out of thin air, and the interest rates for borrowing and lending it, really the cost of renting money, were essentially determined by the laws of supply and demand. Thus, the government could borrow money, but it was real money that already existed in the money supply before it was loaned to the government. It was not newly printed money or money created out of nothing for the sole purpose of lending it to the government. When the banks have a lot of money to lend, because their depositors have saved a lot of money, interest rates go down. When the banks have less money to lend because their depositors have not saved as much, interest rates will go up. That's how a free market works. Just as you pay the supermarket the fair market value for bread, you pay the banker the fair market value for money. With the advent of the Federal Reserve, however, the government came in and removed freedom from the free market. That happened when the Congress gave the Fed the power to set interest rates for all banks and the power to print cash. You see, when the Fed sets artificially low interest rates above which banks cannot lend to their customers, we have what's known as easy money. That's money that is rented out at less than its real rental value, less than what the laws of supply and demand would establish. That, in turn, produces money that is so cheap that folks borrow it who cannot really afford to repay it. And that gives the illusion that many more people in industries are creditworthy than they truly are. That induces people to take on more debt and more risk than they can afford to pay back. At the same time that the Fed has been inducing the wrong people to borrow cheap money, it has actually been printing and lending money to the federal government. When it does this, because it does it in such massive numbers, it dilutes the value of what money and tangible items existed before it began its printing. This produces price inflation. When there is massively more money available to purchase the same amount of goods and services as were available before the Fed began printing, the natural result is a rise in the price of those goods and services. Thus, the Soviet-style central planners at the Fed, in order to provide the federal government with cash for its welfare and warfare, have devalued what we own and what we have saved, at the same time that they have pushed cash onto people and businesses that may never be able to repay it. Periodically, all this comes crumbling down, as it did most recently in the fall of 2008. Also in the fall of 2008, America elected a new president who promised hope and change. Remember that? He delivered instead despair and more of the same. Under President Obama, the Fed has printed more cash and lowered interest rates closer to zero. Under President Obama, the government's debt has been increased by over $4 trillion, much of it printed by the Fed. About a half dozen Republicans are seeking their party's nomination to oppose President Obama. All but one favor the central manipulation of the economy by the Fed and the Congress. Only one of them will change the status quo. Only one of them will audit the Fed and end the Fed. And he wrote about that in this morning's Wall Street Journal. Hey, don't forget to pick up your own copy of my new book, It Is Dangerous to Be Right When the Government is Wrong. It provides the ammunition you need to understand today's big government and to make the case for personal freedom. From New York, defending freedom, everybody's freedom, every night of the week. So long, America.